No risk it, no biscuit.
Arizona Cardinals fans, do you see red? Are you part of the Red Sea? Then you are listening to the show for you. A podcast for Cardinals fans, by Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider perspectives. It's time to rise up and see red. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess from CardsWire.com. The NFL Wire site cover the Arizona Cardinals from the USA Today Sports Media Group. My co-host, as always, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com. The Revenge of the Birds is SB Nation's NFL site for the Arizona Cardinals. Seth, we are a week away. This time next week, we will be in the middle of the legal tampering period, and we're getting close. We're right there. And things going to actually start happening. Already there's lots of rumors, even though technically no one can talk to anyone. But yet that doesn't stop the rumors.
No, I mean, it doesn't stop the rumors, and it's not going to change anything. And it makes it fun. It does. We're going to talk about it in a second, but there's already reports that maybe the two biggest names on the free agent market are already spoken for. They're done. So we'll enjoy the legal tampering period. Wednesday's going to get here. And what time does it officially kick off? Is it like noon on Wednesday Eastern time, or
it's Monday? Monday.
No. The official signing period time.
So that will be the 14th, Wednesday at 2 p.m. Arizona time, I believe.
Yeah. So I mean, 2 p.m. Arizona time, you're probably going to see a couple big names. Will the Cardinals be involved? I don't know. I mean, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We know that they are being reported to have interest in two of the
everybody.
Biggest names. Well, yeah, everybody.
They're interested in everybody
because they have very little on the offensive side of the ball.
And that's going to be what's interesting. And so this our 185th episode is our second part of the free agent preview. The last time we were on, we did our part one, which is talking about each position group and what we felt they needed to do. Tonight on this episode, if we're recording on a Tuesday night, you'll be listening to it Wednesday, Thursday, or sometime thereafter, is to talk about the salary cap moves that each of us would make and kind of our plan, or the candidates and the targets that we think would be a fit for what the Cardinals would like to accomplish given their salary cap restrictions. Because the salary cap was announced, it went up by $10 million to $177.2 million. The Cardinals, with their carryover from a year ago, now have $178.8 officially against the cap, and we'll lead with that. So let's start with salary cap. The Cardinals will have approximately, I think, $20.2 million. I think it's 20.8, roughly $20.8 million, I think is what I calculated in what they have in actual cap space, but more like $28 million in workable cap space, because they are currently on the top 51. And so while they have total cap liabilities about $157 million, that they have about $28 million of money that they can play around with in the offseason in terms of that. Now, you look at that, $20 million does not go very far on a team that has zero quarterbacks, would like to redo the offensive line, and a number of other things. So the Cardinals will have $178.8 million will be their total cap, which means it's $20.9, almost $21 million that they will have in cap space. So with that, Seth, where would you go? What are the cap moves that you would make? So your Cardinals offseason would start with how much money, and how did you come up with that?
I think the first set of moves you have to make is you have to decide how you're going to reformat this offensive line. So Steve Keim Ray Brown and Mike McCoy. Steve Wilkes, I'm sure, is somewhere in the vicinity, but he's really going to lean on McCoy and Ray Brown to rebuild this thing. And so you let those three get into a room together and kind of hash out the value, so to speak, of the players on the roster, because that's the first thing, and that's something we've talked about a lot of, is how the Cardinals haven't done a great job of self-scouting. Whether it be letting players leave or paying players, they haven't done a great job of self-scouting. And so that needs to be the first priority is, okay, what are we going to do on the offensive line? And the two names that immediately come up from everybody is always going to be Mike Iupati and Jared Veldheer. With Iupati, I think you have to move on at this point. I think it could be a release and re-sign closer to training camp type of deal if he's still available and you're not happy with the way free agency and the draft plays out. But I just don't think you can have Mike Iupati on this roster starting next week, basically. I mean, I know that's a harsh reality, but that's the NFL, and his cap number is just too much for what he can provide at this point in time. So that would be kind of my first move that I would make. From there, I think I'm keeping Jared Veldheer for another year. It's not a cost saving move to keep him, but you're going to have to pay somebody, right? And so if you cut Jared Veldheer, you're going to save yourself so right around $7 million. Just call it $7 million for easy money. Are you going to be able to get somebody in that is going to play as well as Veldheer did in that stretch before he got injured and lost for the season for $7 million? And I just don't think you are. I don't know if that's a possibility in this economic market for the NFL. Like you said, the salary cap went up again, and the Cardinals are not players in free agency in the sense of they don't really have the cap space to go cut somebody to save $7 million and then go pay somebody else $10 million, right? Like the name that's bantered about is Nate Solder from the New England Patriots. Do they have $10 or $12 million to pay Nate Solder, who's only 1 year younger than Jared Veldheer? I don't think so. So I would keep Veldheer. I'm not cutting, but I'm definitely signing to an extension. Daniel Buchanan, because I don't think his number can be $8.7 million this year. That's just too high for an off-ball linebacker. It's just too much money. You can't do it. And then, you and I both wrote about it about a week apart from each other, but I think you're cutting Josh Morrow. He's kind of an easy cut. Almost $3 million in cap savings. They're going to cut Adrian Peterson. We know that's coming. So that's another, kind of easy cut to make. I'm also cutting AQ Shipley, and this isn't anything against AQ, but at this point, I think you have to start to find out what you have in guys. But again, this is going to come down to what Ray Brown and Steve Keim kind of come up with at this point. But Shipley is kind of known for being a Arians guy, so I'm not sure if he's going to fit on here anymore. And then you wrote about it today, and I'm not trying to steal Jess's thunder, but I think JJ Nelson makes sense to cut. It's a almost $2 million savings. You're setting yourself up to be able to be a little more aggressive in free agency, and right there, you're still not in a great spot, but you're going to be at about $36 million in cap space, and then you have kind of your trump card if you really want to create another $9 million and be right around another $4 million and be right around $40 million, and you cut Tyrann Mathieu. That's going to be the hardest one. And like I talked about with Veldheer, you're either making sure that you completely believe in Budda Baker and Antoine Bethea, or you have your sights set on somebody. And you wrote about this last week. Kurt Coleman made sense. He was a Wilkes guy. He's a veteran. He could have been kind of the leader that replaced Tyrann Mathieu. Well, he's gone. He's with the New Orleans Saints already. So that's not even an option. So you have to be really careful with the cut. I know everybody says, oh, well, Budda's just going to slide in and replace Mathieu. But remember, they were most effective when they were on the field together. And now all of a sudden, if you take one off, you don't have the dynamic ability of both.
And yeah, that's how we go. For me, I'm going to make some of the same cuts. So they start at $20.9 million. I'm going to cut Mike Iupati. That's another 6.3. I'm going to cut. Like Seth mentioned, I'm going to cut Josh Morrow. It's not an easy cut for me because he does offer some versatility on the new 4-3 defense that we presume that they're going to run. But if he's just a rotational player, I'm not ready to have him sitting there at a $3.3 million cap hit. So that'll save another $2.8 million.
And that's the key to that. Like you said, if they were still in a 34 and he's your starting kind of defensive end out there, that's a steal.
And he still could be their starting defensive end opposite Chandler Jones, and it might be a better fit for him too with his size and that's the thing I don't know, because is Marcus Golden going to fill that defensive end position? Is he going to play more of the off the ball defense, but outside linebacker, but then play more of a rusher? That's the part I don't know, because he can play out, he can play on the edge, and he can play inside. He reminds me of kind of a poor man's Matt Shaughnessy in terms of what he can do, only not quite the run stuffer, but he's super reliable. That said, if you're looking at your defensive line rotation, you've got Chandler Jones on one edge. You're going to say, okay, let's Marcus Golden on the other, or Kareem Martin, whoever ends up being starting if they re-sign Martin. And then you've got two spots in the interior where you've already got Corey Peters, Robert Kimdichie, Olsen Pierre, those three guys who need to be your staples. And from there, after that, you can, on Rodney Gunter, plug and play. You've already got four guys. How many guys are there going to play those two interior positions? So unless, for me, if Morrow's not your starter or a big rotation player on the edge, in the interior, I don't think he's worth that much. Adrian Peterson, that's another $3.5 million. JJ Nelson, another 1.9. I hedge on AQ Shipley. I would like to, because I would like to say, okay, Evan Boehm is ready. But I'm not comfortable with doing that yet. And with my cut so far, that brings me to $35.4 million against the cap. Then what I do, actually, my plan with Jared Valdir is not only keep him, but extend him in a manner, because I think he'll still, if he's okay with an extension, I will basically kick the can forward a little bit and try to lower his cap number from about 10 to 7 or 8. So we'll assume I'm going to save $2 million against the cap. And then kind of do the same thing with Buchanan. Sign him to a deal where his year one cap hit is around 6 to 7 million, giving him another $2 million roughly. And so I'm sitting there right at about $39.4 million. I'm not ready to cut Tyrann Mathieu. And so there's some more money there that could be had. If you look at cutting Mathieu, you look at cutting Shipley. If you believe that Evan Boehm is ready to be the starter, or that they're going to draft someone who can fill in as the starter in day one, and then there's some guys out there who could do that. A couple of names that are considered as of right now plug and play guys: Billy Price from Ohio State, James Daniels from Iowa. A couple of guys I personally like what I've read about, because you could draft them and put them at any of the interior positions from day one, potentially. So if that's kind of their plan, you could save another $2 million. But I'm comfortable going into the offseason with about $39.5 million. And that's where I start. And so I guess where we have to begin then from there is at quarterback, because that is the position they have to take care of first and foremost. So let's talk about the quarterbacks.
Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
Let's talk quarterbacks and look at, well then, what do they do? Kirk Cousins, do you personally go that route? If that's, you've got about $40 million of space, do you say, okay, I'm all in on Cousins, and that's the guy I'm going to try and get first and then deal with everything after that?
I think for the Cardinals, because the quarterback position is obviously the most important, you have to look at it. And we talked about this last week or a couple weeks ago, but the biggest thing with Cousins is look what he did with a similar roster to what the Cardinals have at this moment. Not necessarily what they could look like in August or in 2019, but what as they stand right now. And it's very similar to what Carson Palmer did. And so all of a sudden, if you build the team around him in maybe through the draft this year, and then, kind of spend a little bit in free agency when you have all that money next year in 2019, I think you can do it. The biggest issue you're going to come up against are two things. One, what numbers are you going to be willing to give to Kirk Cousins? And then two, if the number that's being floated right now in the media of what the Vikings are offering, a 3-year, $91 million, all guaranteed money contract, then the Cardinals are out. And they're out not because that number's ridiculous. $30 million a year is going to look like nothing, probably by the end of 2019. But the Cardinals cannot compete with that because the way they'd have to structure it would absolutely kill them the next 2 years, because they would probably have to structure it where you're talking like $37.5 million in year 2 and year 3 guaranteed money, and not, in order to save some space this year. They can't compete with the $30 million a year offer if that's what the Vikings really are going to do. So that's the thing. If you can come in at a 5-year, 125, 135, whatever it's going to end up being, $1 million deal for Cousins, or 140, I think is what the number is. And you can tell him, year one, we need you to take 15 of your, 62 guaranteed or whatever it is. And then year two, we'll give you, 35 to offset it. Then I think you're okay. But you can't compete with, you just can't compete with $91 million guaranteed money.
And I'm going to counter with that and say I think the Cardinals can do that. The big hit is next year. Actually, I kind of put together the framework of a basic deal for Cousins at $29 million a year. So 5 years, $145 million. And it not only works for this year, it can work moving forward. And I looked at the money from the first 2 years because I was looking at Jimmy Garoppolo's deal. The way I had it structured is that he gets $20 million up front, and then he makes 15 in salary. So he's getting $35 million in actual cash in year one. He counts against the cap as $19 million. Then next year in 2019, that's the big hit, and that's where we're looking ahead. Okay, he would count $37 million against the cap in 2019. That right now, based on what their cap liabilities are, they've got more than $100 million in cap space right now. And so, if you know that going in, okay, you can work with that. And so, but the way I have it set up is that so he gets, then you've got the $4 million proration, and then you pay him a total of, what I say it was, another $21 million. No, what was it? $31 million. But it came to, I can't remember the exact structure, but it gave him $35 million at the end of year one, $70 million after year two, and which with the Jimmy Garoppolo deal, that's $9 million more than he gets in the first 2 years. And then in year 3, 4, and 5, it's pretty straightforward. You pay him a mix of $25 million per year in terms of roster and salary, and then you've got your $4 million cap hit on top of that. So he's sitting right at $29 million in cap hit for the following 3 years, which, if we look at the quarterback market, that's pretty much what the league is going to be dealing with overall. So what we're looking at, and if you want to guarantee all 3 of the first year, so potentially the way I have this deal set up is that you can get him $29 million a year average, 35 after year 1, 70 after year 2, and $95 million guaranteed over year 3. Now, knowing that means you're committing that much, and he better deliver, and you better also hit on draft picks for that to work. But if he's the guy they want, if I can put that structure together, so can the Cardinals. I mean, that's what, Steve Keim and Disner that's what they do. And if I can put together a deal that works not only this year against the cap, it'll stretch the cap next year, but thereafter you can get him all that money, I think. And I think he should be option number 1 on if you can get him, because he's the best quarterback that there is out there. Barring Drew Brees, I don't think Drew Brees is going to be really available, but he's going to be the best option, and he can work for you now and many years down the road, as opposed to the other guys that are out there are big question marks. So Case Keenum, he's a question mark. Sam Bradford, question mark. Teddy Bridgewater, question mark. Josh McCown, not only a question mark. There's no looking past this first year, and where they're picking a quarterback at number 15 is going to either be they're taking him because, and in one of the next podcasts we do when we start talking the draft, a comment that Steve Keim made, which is a little bit different, kind of goes against what we've gone over the last few years about quarterbacks. He might be setting us up for drafting a quarterback in the first round, whether it's at 15 or whether they trade back a few picks. That's probably the consensus is a reach, but they believe in him. And even still, you still ride with Cousins for 3 years. You still got 2 years with that potential first rounder. And even then, in year 4 of that Cousins deal, even though year 4, he's still got a $29 million hit against the cap, you can save 21 with $8 million dead at that point, based on the initial signing bonus of $20 million. So to me, it's doable. If they want Kirk Cousins and Kirk Cousins wants to come here, there's the way to give him the money that he deserves, or that should be paid according to the market.
Right. And I just don't see it. I just don't see that they can compete with 391. I understand how you worked it out in the math and everything, but they really need that first year cap hit to be around under 20 million. And that's what I worry about, to have an impact on anything else, because they do have so many holes. You really don't want to go too forward with what they have right now. I think when it's all said and done, when you look at the quarterback market, they're going to end up with 1 or 2 guys, and it's going to be kind of a coin flip based on medicals and salary demands. But I think they're going to end up with one of Sam Bradford or Teddy Bridgewater. And those guys are going to be guys you can get probably in the 10 to 12 range, maybe even less, 7 to 8 for Bridgewater. But I think you're going to be able to get somebody like Bridgewater for 2 years at $25 million, with that second year being a big kicker based on playing time incentives from 2018. And honestly, a Bradford contract would be structured basically the same way, maybe with just more first year money, but I don't know if he can actually demand any more first year money than Bridgewater at this point. The reason I say that is I think it gives the Cardinals a chance to get an upper third of the league, probably a top 12 to 14 quarterback, so upper half of the league type quarterback, and do it at a discount, which we know is Steve Keim's favorite thing. But then it also doesn't preclude them from drafting a quarterback. Whereas, like, you go to Cousins, and this will be the year that, Josh Rosen falls to 15, right? Like you go pay Kirk Cousins $91 million guaranteed, or 92 or whatever it is, to get him away from Minnesota. And all of a sudden, you have your choice of Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, and Baker Mayfield at 15. And you're like, well, that didn't work the way we wanted it to. So I think they're going to end up with one of those guys, and that's it because it plays into their hands better in terms of cost, and then they can still get, because that's the thing. I mean, obviously availability is the most important thing, but if they're on the field, there's not a huge drop off between Cousins and Bridgewater and Bradford. There's just the whole, like, you got to be on the field thing.
Yeah, the one thing is Bridgewater. We both have written about it. You wrote about it recently. I wrote a couple days ago. Bridgewater is a huge wild card in this entire thing because he was, now statistically nothing spectacular in terms of touchdowns to interceptions. He didn't throw a lot of touchdowns in his first couple of years, but he looked like, after year 2, it looked like he was turning the corner and had taken the next step in his development. And it was, it just was not good. And it was devastating to the team when that happened. So Bridgewater is a possibility. Case Keenum, seems to be there. There's a report out of Denver saying that, in addition to Cardinals reportedly being, first among the final 4 and then out of the final 2, but now not necessarily eliminated for Kirk Cousins, that they are also one of 4 teams that will go after Case Keenum, kind of as plan B, with the Broncos, the Vikings, and the Browns. Case Keenum then offers something else. He's not going to make the same money that Cousins does, but the downside to that, he's still going to draw big money, whether you're going to be able to sign him for only 3 years, or if you're going to have to go that full 5 and just structure it so that you can get out after 3 without too much of a deal. He's a big question mark because he's got one good season. He has a few good games, and then he's got his good season so far, just last year. And Cousins, I'm comfortable throwing money at him to say you're the quarterback because we've seen 3 straight years of really good production. You've heard me on the record on this show saying that I don't really believe in Kirk Cousins, but you can't deny what production he's done over the last 3 years on a roster that, wasn't the most talented. He's gotten them to play. He got Washington to the playoff once and wasn't in a situation where the team even believed in him. They never believed in him enough to sign him to that long-term deal. And then basically let him walk for a guy who might not be quite as good in Alex Smith. So yeah, that's interesting. Now, Case Keenum for me, I worry a little bit because, for him to be successful, he had to have everything in place for him because Minnesota is an incredibly talented team, and that worked. Will the Cardinals be able to do that and have the same success with Keenum?
Well, I say no. And the other reason I balk at Keenum is the price tag. Because here's the deal. If you're going to sign Keenum, it's going to cost you $20 million a year. Like, that's just the price tag. It doesn't make sense to Jess or I. We're not advocating for him to make that much money like that, but that's what it's going to cost. And I just, for me, it doesn't make any sense. You can't do it. There's too many other issues on this team. And so, and I do feel like Keenum kind of precludes you from drafting a quarterback if you're going to give him $20 million, right? Like it doesn't preclude you from drafting Mike White late on day 2 with like pick 97, but it definitely precludes you from taking Baker Mayfield at 15 because you're probably signing him to like a 3-year $60 million, 40 or 80 million, with half of that kind of money guarantee type thing. And so you're going to give him 2018. And so there's no way you're going to go into 2018 and draft a quarterback to compete with the guy that you just signed for 20 some odd million. Now, if you could get him at a reasonable price, half that, 10 to maybe even 15 million. You could talk
impossible. It really is. It's impossible.
Right, it is. But if you could get him there, I'm fine with it. But the cost of 20 million, like you said, with the circumstances he likely needs to be in to be as successful or repeat his success again, I just can't pull that trigger.
And which brings us down to the next batch of next couple of players, which are Teddy Bridgewater and Sam Bradford we'd mentioned. It sounds like with the predicted kind of contract is what Seth mentioned, that Teddy Bridgewater will command about 2 years, $25 million. That's reason. In fact, that's if his medicals check out, he's the most intriguing one because he could potentially be your franchise quarterback. But then at the same time, the team that had him, the team that drafted him, the team that gave him the keys to the car are now fine with letting him go, which tells me, oh, maybe there's something. Maybe he might not be the same player. And but for 1 year, okay, maybe you're okay with that. Bradford, on the other hand, in terms of the talent, you have to look at him and Kirk Cousins, and Bradford has the best arm talent and the best ceiling of all of them, but we just know that his durability is a huge concern. I don't mind in fact, Bradford, I kind of like. Maybe magic can happen here, but his most recent knee injury does give me pause, and he has made it through a season before. The 2015 season, he played really well in Philadelphia. So the potential is there. Whether it's a 1 year, 2 year deal, you're probably looking kind of around the same thing like Seth says. You're looking 2 years, $25 million. Bradford is probably not going to top. It's not going to cost anyone more than $15 million. So somewhere between 10 and 15 million a year is probably what's going to take. And that becomes then a reasonable thing. So me, if it's my Cardinals, number one, I'm going after Kirk Cousins. If it doesn't work out, okay, I go with Bridgewater or I go with Bradford. And that's kind of where I am. Case Keenum, I've got concerns about. Josh McCown, I don't want him starting. I'll take his as a backup.
But the other thing is, and we talked about this the other week, but with McCown, he gets injured every year.
No one's talking about that. He's never healthy. He never stays healthy. And his best year, his absolute best year was last year on a terrible team. Okay, he's on a terrible team. They weren't a good enough team. So his success, any success that McCown has had, has been on bad teams. And so if you want the Cardinals to be a bad team, you give Josh McCown the keys to start. Now, when you have Josh McCown starting, it's kind of like a situation where he or like a Brian Hoyer, you're hoping that your rookie is ready at some point during the year, that you have to have a quarterback on the roster because there's no way you can count on Josh McCown to be more than a backup. I love Josh McCown as a backup because he can get you through a game or two. He can win you a couple games. He's an older version of Drew Stanton, and Drew Stanton was pretty solid. But no, I don't want him starting. No way.
No, and I'm with you 100%. And, if you go in and the thing is with McCown is, if you sign him, you almost lock yourself into picking a guy at 15 or trading up or whatever. Because you can't go into the season with a Josh McCown and let's just throw Drew Stanton or Blaine Gabbert. Like, that cannot be your quarterback situation. Especially in Steve Wilkes' first year. Oh, my gosh. Like, that. Would he even make it through the year? Would he just quit? Like, can't do that.
No. So here's another name out there, just for fun. Jay Cutler. I'd be more comfortable with Jay Cutler than Josh McCown any day of the week that ends in Y. Every single one, I'd rather have Jay Cutler than Josh McCown, and nobody's talking about Jay Cutler.
Right. Yeah. And you would, you could probably bring him in. Mike McCoy worked with him for 1 year in Denver, right? It was just the one. I believe it was just 2009. I think it was McCoy's first year as a coordinator, and then they went, the Tebow and Kyle Orton route, if I remember right. So I don't know. I mean, the thing is with Cutler and Bradford is that these guys are going to be – Bradford's going to be 31 this year. I think Jay Cutler's going to be 32 this year. He's going to be 35 this year.
Yeah, Cutler's old now.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that. So, yeah. So, I mean, you're at the point where you're like, do I really want another wrong side of 30 quarterback on a short-term type thing? I don't know. Bradford, I think, is a better scenario than Cutler, just because I just don't think Cutler would fit with what McCoy wants to do. But I could be wrong about that.
And so that'll wrap up kind of our talk about quarterbacks. It looks like in a perfect scenario where we can land Kirk Cousins, that eats up roughly half of the cap space, giving the Cardinals about $19 to $20 million left, about $20 million left. So what do they do after that? So they're looking, they land Cousins, they're looking at about $20 million left against the cap. You land the other guys, and you're dropping that, you're increasing that to about $30 million. So what's next? What are the other positions? That's what we're going to talk about next on the Rise Up See Red podcast. That's coming up next. I'd like to remind you guys, of course, the show, which is brought to you by Harrys.com, my friends over at Harrys.com. If you haven't made the switch yet, come on, be one of the other 3 million guys out there that have made the switch to Harrys.com. Be like me. I made the switch. I don't regret it. I was doing the electric razor for a long, long time. I made the switch to Harry's. I love the shave. I love the blades. I love the shaving cream. It's great. And I love the convenience that it is that the blades get sent right to my door. It's a great shave at a really good price. $2 a blade, high quality, German engineering, that sort of thing. The thing is, and you've heard the deal is still out there for you guys. If you go to harrys.com/cred, you can get the trial set for the cost of shipping for $3. You get the trial set, you get the foaming shave gel, you get the handle, you get the 5-blade blade, the head that you can shave with to test it out. You get the travel carrier. You get all that. It's a $13 value that you get for $3. You won't regret it. You'll get a great shave, and keep it going. And then you can order the blades that you need and keep on going. And that's the deal that we've got at Harry's. It's harrys.com/cred. Go today. Go right now. harrys.com/cred and sign up for your free trial. Pay just for the shipping. $3. Again, that's harrys.com/cred.
Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast. And the next group of free agents that I think we're probably in agreement with is that offensive line has got to be the next one. The Cardinals are going to have to hit heavy at quarterback. They're going to have to hit at quarterback, and they're going to have to spend some money on the offensive line. Correct?
Yeah, I think they have to, and it comes down to the fact that they've spent money on aged veterans, and they've aged out. You know, we talked about Upati. They've spent money on guys like They've spent money on guys like AQ Shipley and the like, and it's just now to the point where they have to find a way to get younger and healthier and better at these positions. And so when you look at the offensive line, there's a lot of interesting talent out there at this point where, I mean, Andrew Norwell's the big name, but, is he going to be available? It sounds like no. So, but that doesn't mean anything because there's other guys out there that are really interesting. And it starts at the center position for me.
Who you got? Who you got at center? I hadn't even considered center because I was going to ride with AQ Shipley. And if I'm bringing in a center, I think I'm looking through the draft, or I'm hoping that Evan Boehm does it. But who are the names at center you got?
Well, I think initially the first guy you look at is John Sullivan. He's a Grizzly veteran of basically 3 decades at this point from in the NFL. He played really well last year for the Los Angeles Rams, kind of helped settle down their offensive line. And I don't think he would cost too much. I think he would be a nice upgrade from Shipley at probably maybe around the same cost, maybe a little more, but it would allow you to be more aggressive in the draft for guards. And so if you're going to go with, let's say, a DJ Humphries and a Jared Valdir as your tackles, the guards are where the money is going to get spent. And so you bring in a guy like John Sullivan, and all of a sudden you can draft a Quentin Nelson if he somehow falls to 15, or you grab a Will Hernandez on a trade back later in round 1, or an Austin Corbett on day 2. You draft these guys, and all of a sudden you have a guy like Sullivan in there who can be the anchor and can be the leader of that team. If you wanted to go younger and maybe like a long-term type of guy, I think the guy you look at is Ryan Jensen of the Baltimore Ravens. And so those are, like Sullivan, kind of the anchor, but he's going to cost you more. He's probably going to be $5 to $7 million a year, which seems steep. But again, I think if you have Humphries, veteran center, and Valdir, you can be a little more, little. You can take some chances with your guard plays, and that would allow those veterans. I know Hump is not really a veteran, but a veteran kind of being next to both of those guards would allow you to do some different things, and that's why I've thought about the center position a lot, because I just don't think they're going to be in play for a big name guard. Now, we'll talk about Alex Boone in a second, but I just don't think they'll be in play for a guy that's going to actually be kind of a game changer, because those guys are going to command money that we're talking about for Teddy Bridgewater or Sam Bradford. That's what guards are getting paid now.
Yeah, it's great. Like with the salary cap going the way it is, salaries have gone bonkers. Salaries are going crazy across the board. Unless you are a linebacker. And even then it's going to go safety. Safety is still the one position where like your franchise tag numbers are still within reason. For me, I don't even, as much as I'd like Andrew Norwell, if you get the prize of Kirk Cousins, I think it's almost impossible to add him. Especially when you want to do more than just add one position. So I didn't consider tackles at all. I didn't look at center at all because, 1, I'm keeping AQ Shipley. 2, or Evan Boehm is ready to step in and I'm comfortable with that. Or 3, I think they draft somebody. And Shipley might be a cut that I make later on. There's, like I said, there's a couple of guys out there that there's 2 or 3 names in the draft that could be plug and play guys either at guard or at center. And so my approach at guard is not game changer. It's not the big splash like the Cardinals did for Valdir back in 2013 and Mike Iupati in 2014, but rather it's the get me to my next guy. It's the get me through till I draft a guy who can step in, which I think has kind of been what the Cardinals have wanted to do and just haven't been able to pull off. And so the Alex Boone is a guy I'd like to re-sign. And if you look at kind of what it would cost for an Andrew Norwell, Alex Boone probably is in the. I don't think it's going to be for the 3 to 4 million. I think you're going to get him at 2 years at between 5 and 7 million a year. So you're basically with what you save by cutting Mike Iupati, and you're doing a lateral move in terms of salary for potentially more durability. Even though Alex Boone has had, I think durability is a little bit of an issue with him, not to the same extent that we've had with Iupati, who's been nicked up for the past 2 years and then missed the entire season virtually. So Alex Boone is a guy I look at. Recently released, Josh Sitton for previous with the Bears is another guy that you might want to take a look at. These are all going to be in the 30, right around the 30-year-old age spot. So it's not ideal, but they're going to cost less. An intriguing name to me, not because he's great, but because he will fit the system really well, I believe, is Matt Slauson. Played for the Chargers for a couple of years now. He's versatile, so he can play. He started at center. He started at guard. He's familiar with Mike McCoy's offensive system. He does have some injury concerns, but I think he's going to be a capable guy that you're comfortable with. Again, they're going to build the offensive line, but I think they're not going to try and be game changers unless they can land that one guy in Norwell. So Slauson is a get me over to my next player type of player. Solid. If I had to pick two, I'd go Slauson and Boone, or I'd go Slauson and Sitton. The other name on there that I don't really like because kind of every concern you've got about Mike Iupati is the same as Sean Lauvau, 30 years old. He's played the last 7 seasons at both guard positions, but he's missed 20 games in the last 3 seasons. He's not going to be expensive, but the injuries, again, is like you're basically just getting a cheaper Mike Iupati. Which if you can save money, great, but you're going to save $6.3 million with the cut of Iupati. You can get an equal replacement who will stay on the field for probably that much. You're not going to save much money though.
Another guy that I like, but it's probably going to be out of their price range, is Josh Klein of the Tennessee Titans. I think he provides. He's 28, so he'll be the same age, I believe, that Iupati was when he signed here. He'd probably be in the same price range, that $7 to $9 million price range. He's the guy that has been a part of a very talented and physical offensive line, so he kind of fit the Ray Brown thing. But the whole thing with the guards is this to me. The Ray Brown has taken a 3rd-round pick and a undrafted free agent and turned them both into high-paid all-pros. So I feel like they don't, as much as they need to address the guard position in free agency, they don't really need to address the guard position in free agency. Because I feel like with Ray Brown on the staff now, you have to have faith in him. Now, I know we've all heard this before. Obviously, Joe Bugle did a nice job with the Cardinals' offensive line, became head coach, and then did not do a good job with the Cardinals' offensive line. But we heard the same thing with Russ Grimm. Never really worked out. But I'm hoping Ray Brown is different because he's been successful in Carolina over the last several years, and he's helped create these dynamic all-pro type players at the guard position in Norwell and Try Turner. So, maybe he's different. That's my hope.
So Earl Watford, is he a guy that you could see Brown turning into not just journeyman versatile, but solid starter? Because he definitely has athleticism.
Yeah, he just doesn't fit like the profile. Like when you look at let's start with Norwell because he's obviously the big name that's out there right now. But when you look at Andrew Norwell, he's 6'6", 325. I mean, he's a big dude. So he uses these kind of more of these power players. Whereas, you kind of talked about Watford. He's not really a power player. He's more of a finesse, agile quick guy. Try Turner's 6'3", but he's 320 pounds. So he's, he's a little squattier, a little shorter, but he's a powerful dude. When you look at those guys, that's who he has molded into stars at their position. And I don't think Watford fits that mold. I don't think Bame fits that mold. I don't think AQ Shipley fits that mold, really. I think when you look at what they need is they need to really revamp the interior of the offensive line, especially if they're going to live up to the mantra that is they're going to be a run first type of team that Steve Wilks wants to be.
We'll look at the wide receiver position. Actually, before we move on to the wide receiver position, let's take another break. And so coming up next on Rise Up C-Red, we'll be back and we'll talk about the receiver position. We're back on Rise Up C-Red. We're going to talk about receivers. I think whether the receiver position is more important or the offensive line, I think the reason why you don't go out receiver first is because Larry Fitzgerald is back. But what do you do in free agency at receiver? They've got Larry Fitzgerald and they have Chad Williams and J.J. Nelson, except for technically they don't even have J.J. Nelson because we already cut him. J.J. Nelson on his rookie contract, when he's making $750,000, yeah, you can have him at the back of the roster, whether he's a number 4 or number 5. I have no problem with that. I do have more of a problem with him not being a key special teamer because when he's a special teamer, he's a returner, and he hasn't done much of that recently. Or he's got to be a solid contributor on offense. And as a number 3 receiver, as a number 2 receiver, he was not great. And so, but at $1.9 million, I'm not willing to pay him that much to be at the back of the roster and not be a significant contribute on special teams like Jerron Brown was when he was in his 4th year and on that restricted free agent tender and before his ACL tour. But he at least was a core special teamer, and you don't get that from JJ. So really you only have Fitz and Chad Williams. And I'm not giving up on Chad Williams yet, but if I'm looking at the receiver position in free agency, I'm not looking for the big splash. I'm looking for ideally an established kind of number 2 with number 1 potential is ideally what we can find. Well, what's kind of your approach?
I think with this wide receiver free agent class, you have a bunch of guys that are young who are unknown in the sense that they haven't really gotten an opportunity to be receiver 2s, step into the kind of spotlight. The first name that comes to mind is Albert Wilson of the Chiefs, who's done a nice job but hasn't really gotten the chance to spread his wings. The next guy would be Cody Latimer of the Denver Broncos, who maybe he was held back by quarterback play there in Denver. The thing with Latimer is obviously Mike McCoy is going to have a little bit of insight, not a ton, but I mean, he was there with him through the spring, the summer, and training camp, and then for part of the season. So he'll have an idea of who he is as a player and whether or not he wants to make a play for him. Those guys are both young. Like I said, Wilson's 26.
And well, at least Latimer was cheap. So we're not talking even 6-7 million. You're thinking like 2 to 3, I'm thinking.
Right. And that's what I'm thinking with this group is I think you have to give Chad Williams a chance to evolve, even though the way Steve Wilks dodged that question at the combine was super interesting to me.
Well, especially said, I'm not going to talk about personnel, but wait, Tyrann Mathieu, yes, he fits everything we want to do. But we won't talk about it. We didn't talk about any other plays, but with Tyrann Mathieu, yes, he does this, he does this, he does this, he does this. But granted, Mathieu is a defensive back, and that's Wilkes' specialty, defense. So, yes, but he didn't want to get into personnel. That said,
yes, those two guys make sense to me because I think like Wilson will probably get $4 to $5 million, and Latimer will get 2 to 3. So instead of going and getting, let's say, Sammy Watkins or Marquise Lee for like $8 to $9 million a year, go get two guys that can probably produce similar numbers and give yourself a well-rounded receiving corps, because you're not cutting Chad Williams. I mean, it's just not happening. And so you're sitting here and you're going, okay, we have Larry Fitzgerald. We can slot Albert Wilson in as the number 2, Latimer's the 2-3, and then Williams is the guy that you can move around and do things with, try to get him in the ball in space, let him use his athleticism, and kind of bring along as you go. And now all of a sudden, is that a receiver group as good as the one we talked about a lot in 2015? Absolutely not. Nowhere close. But is that a receiver group that blocks well? Yes. Is that a receiver group that is diverse in their abilities? Latimer's like 6'2" or 6'3" and a speedster. Wilson is a guy that can do a lot of different things. And we know about Fitzgerald. We don't really know much about Chad Williams at this point. But you're talking about having, 2 new guys come in who are diverse, and then you're talking about maybe having 3 of the best blocking wide receivers in the NFL with Wilson, Latimer, and Fitz, obviously. And all of a sudden, you're talking about a team that, okay, well, we don't do a ton. We're not going to throw the ball, 48 times a game like they did with Bruce Arians, but when we do throw the ball, we have the ability to throw it short. We have the ability to throw it long, take the top off. And oh, by the way, when we're in our 3 receiver sets, we can run the ball because all 3 of these guys can block well.
And for me, I'm looking at it a little bit. Some of those names look good for me. I'm still looking for more of an impact receiver because, especially, I didn't draft Chad Williams. So if I'm Steve Wilkes, okay, I'll see what he has. But we'd like to get someone more established. And so my actual favorite name on the list is Paul Richardson out of Seattle. His estimated market value that they have on some of these sites is about a little more than $6 million a year. I think that's a contract they can handle. He offers speed. He has made when it comes to clutch, he's made some of the most difficult catches we've seen on the biggest stage. The problem is, apparently, as Mike Jurecki tweeted out Tuesday night, is that as of right now, the Cardinals don't have any interest in him. So I'm like, oh, never mind. Because he was like, oh, yeah, I really like him. I like the fit with what he could do. Marquise Lee, I don't know how much he's going to actually cost. Like if he's in the $6 to $7 million range, I go with that. I'm not looking to pay 8, 9, 10 million because we already got Fitz. And the cap space, you just can't do that, in my opinion, based on what the Cardinals have. Marquise Lee, though, he's a good complementary piece, and he's not really. He's kind of proven that he's not kind of the low end number 1, but he can be a really nice complementary piece if there is a number 1 next to him or opposite him. He had 702 yards last year. He caught 63 passes in 2016 for 851. He's got okay speed. He's got okay hands. He's not special, but he can be productive. And if you've got the right quarterback, I mean, he went for 56 and 702 last year on an offense that was basically all running the ball. So I like Marquise Lee as a potential. I don't know but if he's going to command more than $6 or $7 million a year, I don't like it. Now, this next name, Sammy Watkins, he was potentially going to be franchised. The Rams didn't franchise him. He is, in my book, would be the most ideal setting. The problem is, the estimated market value that they have listed on this website on SpotTrack is the fact that it's saying it's $5.9 million a year, and I don't think, especially if the Rams were considering franchising him at $12, $13 million a year, I don't think there's any way that he's going to go to on a team like that. Now, before the show, you mentioned doing like a 1-year deal for $10 million. Watkins is kind of a wild card here. Yes, he's got the foot injury issues, but he played in 15 games last year. He wasn't super productive with the Rams, 39 passes for under 600 yards, but he does have number 1 receiver potential. He's got that potential, and pair him with Larry Fitzgerald, that could be a lot of fun. But the fact that he was being considered to be franchised, I don't think less than $10 million a year is going to get him.
No, I agree with you. And like I said, I just don't think you can do that with this roster the way that it's set up right now. I think you have to find bargains. I think you have to go cheap in some spots, and I think you have to draft better. I mean, that's just
Yes.
being quite frank, but I think you have to hit on some of these draft picks. You know, they don't have to be all pros in year one, but if you can get a guy that catches 40 balls for, 600 yards, that's going to be a huge get for you, as opposed to seeing action in 3 games. Is that what Chad Williams got last year? So they need to start hitting on these guys and kind of changing the perception and the way that they draft players and develop them.
Ryan Grant with Washington is an interesting name. He doesn't do anything particularly. He doesn't have any special traits. He was a 5th round pick, but I mean, last year he was productive. He was productive. Kirk Cousins. If you land Kirk Cousins, you can probably get Ryan Grant fairly cheap and a familiar face. The other name that I have on here is a name that's come up a few times with the Cardinals because of Bruce Arians. Mike Wallace. He's 32 years old, coming up this next season, but he still can run. He can still catch. And I think he would work really well with a room with Larry Fitzgerald. It was just 2 years ago. It was just 2 seasons ago. He had over 1,000 yards with Baltimore, and so he makes. I think he makes a decent 2-3 guy, and at his age, he's not going to command too much money, so I wouldn't mind him going that route. But obviously, that's more of a placeholder till the next guy develops, till Chad Williams is a solid number 2, or they draft someone who's a solid number 2, or they draft their future in top 1, but I think as Mike Wallace would be an okay selection that would add to that group. It's not quite doing what the Rams did with receiver with Robert Woods and Sammy Watkins and Cooper Kupp, and it's not quite doing the Torrey Smith, Nelson Aguilar, and the way that they did that in Philadelphia. But you get an established guy, as long as you don't expect him to be your number 1 option. Mike Wallace, I think, is an okay addition.
Yeah, he'd be fine. And he would do a nice job. And, I just don't know if he fits what this roster is now. That's the problem. I mean, you have to remember that this roster is probably going to be quite different by 2019 for Steve Wilks. So if you get Wallace on a 1-year deal like you're talking about, I think that makes sense. But I don't know if he's even a guy that would be on their radar now with Steve Wilks at the helm.
It's a possibility. Any other names that you'd consider? I do like the Latimer. That's a name, especially as the new coaching staff. You always look for players that have connections with the staff. So Latimer having played, or a Matt Slauson on the offensive line, or like was a possibility before he got scooped up by the Saints. Kurt Coleman is a defensive guy. They already brought in, Lance Young or Lonnie something for the cornerback who played for the Panthers a couple of years ago. So they're getting some of the Panthers blood in there that's familiar with their new system.
That's it for wide receiver, but I do have a couple cornerbacks as we round this out tonight.
And that's what we'll talk about on the next segment of Rise Up See. We're going to talk about cornerbacks and the possibilities there. We're back on Rise Up See Red talking cornerbacks and then any other positions that are a possibility. Cornerback is, I think you and I probably agree in terms of free agency. Probably number 1 is bring back Tyrann Williams because of the price tag and the fit, right?
Yeah, I think you got to bring back Williams, and I think he has to be your cornerback too until somebody beats him out. Obviously, if a guy like Denzel Ward, maybe a Josh Jackson type, are there at 15, and you've already signed Kirk Cousins or Teddy Bridgewater or any of these guys, you have the opportunity to draft one of them, and having Tyrann Williams on the roster for $3.5 million or whatever it is doesn't hurt you. So I would agree with that. When you look at the corners, there's 2 names kind of at the top of the list that intrigued me because of the age and the fact that they bring the physicality that the Cardinals will be looking for in corners. When you talk about this kind of new group under Steve Wilks, but you have to wonder what their costs are going to be because, like guards and like quarterbacks, the market's just going way up.
Me, I've got a couple of names on here that are, and kind of like for me, I guess what I'm seeing is kind of my theme for the Cardinals in free agency is solid to potential to be decent. And I wrote an article a little bit ago, I think it was about a week ago, about the veteran corners they could go after in free agency. The three names outside of Tyrann Williams were Bashaud Breeland, Washington, who was their main guy until they got Josh Norman, Rashawn Melvin from Indianapolis. Really kind of came on last year almost out of nowhere. Did have an injury, but I kind of equate that to kind of the last guy that the Cardinals brought out of Indianapolis who kind of emerged. Gerard Powers had been a starter for a while. Rashawn Melvin has kind of built his way, bounced around for a couple of teams. And then he's got the nice length at 6'2". He picked off 3 passes in 10 games, had a hand injury, but I don't know how much he's going to command, especially with really only a portion of a season that was really solid. EJ Gaines, who was with the Rams and was part of the Sammy Watkins deal. And then if it happens, there's always Marcus Cooper who got his money. If he becomes available, he would sort of fit that long physical type.
And you talked about one of my guys in Breeland. The other guy that I like in this class is, but you know, Breeland's 26, and you mentioned Rashawn Melvin. He's 28, and he kind of fits that mold as well. But the other guy that I like is Blitty Ray Wilson from the Falcons, and he's another big guy, 6'1", just under 200 pounds. And I think he would fit with this scheme that Steve Wilks likes to run. And I think he would be infinitely cheaper than a guy like Bashaud Breeland, who I think is probably going to end up getting in like that $6 to $8 million range.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of where he's set on his approximate market value. But I think that the Cardinals can weather a $6 or $7 million a year contract for a number 2 corner. They got themselves a smoking deal with Tyrann Williams. The other option is that's actually really intriguing to me. I don't want to count on him as a starter, but the fact that Steve Wilks has had such great success with defensive backs makes me hope that he's the guy to turn Brandon Williams into a good player. The one that's not scary, that out there, but because he turned a corner at the end of the last preseason, and now we just haven't seen since then. But you get a guy like Wilks who is known for developing guys. He's got the athleticism. He's got the physicality. He could turn into something real nice.
And the size. And you talk about that, and that's the whole thing is, we've talked a lot tonight about Ray Brown and Steve Wilks and their development or their developmental ideals. And when you look at both of them, that's where they've been the most successful, is developing players, developing these kind of unheralded guys into superstars. And so do you want to trust that with Brandon Williams? No, but again, it goes back to our point at the very beginning of this segment that if you bring back Tyrann Williams, you're not relying on Brandon Williams. But if Brandon Williams does turn the corner, you're going to reap the benefits because you've got a guy in Tyrann Williams who, God forbid anything happens to Patrick Peterson, is a more than capable fill-in. And now all of a sudden you've got two guys still, because the one position you can never have enough of is cornerbacks in the NFL. You just can't have enough. You can get by with a lot of different things. Obviously, if you lose your quarterback, unless you're the Eagles, you're usually screwed. But you can't have enough talent at the cornerback position. It's not possible. And so if you bring back Tyrann Williams, you draft a guy on day 2 or 3 that Wilkes is going to mold, but then you are able to start pulling that out of Brandon Williams. And maybe, I know it's year 3 and you'd like to see him being, a 16-game starter and playing over 1,000 snaps. But even if you were to get, 500 or 600 defensive snaps from him this year, and then you go into year 4 and you're like, look, this is a guy we can count on now to be our number 2 opposite Patrick. That's a huge win. That is a huge win, because at this point we're just talking about whether or not they're actually going to have him on the roster come August, right? because if Steve Wilkes goes, yeah, I can't work with this, then they're going to move on. So
yeah, and the interesting for me for Brandon Williams is that the way he plays, I would almost, now he has that's the thing, his physical traits, his length, his speed, his movement ability, they're elite. As Steve Keim has gushed about this, his change of direction, his movement skills are great. But the way he plays on the field feels like a safety. I think that might, for me, that would be my next move for him. All right, now you can be super physical and still have some cover skills where you're not as exposed in outside like that. So that's a discussion for another thing. But I could see Brandon Williams being a successful safety. They're just not ready to do that because they see the potential with him as an outside corner, which obviously is much more valuable than safeties, as we know, as we've learned over the years, that in terms of regular safeties, the Cardinals don't put a huge value on them. But for me, the other position that the Cardinals have to take a look at is a tight end. And they just don't have any to count on. Jermaine Gresham's got the torn Achilles. So they've got to bring somebody in, and they can't spend a lot of money because they already got a lot of money sunk into Gresham. Can't count on Troy Nicholas. While Ricky Seals-Jones is a nice piece, you don't want to count on him as a starter, and he's not going to be your inline guy either, really. Couple of names that I like is they're not going to cost a lot, and I think they will fit. The fact that Virgil Green played for the Denver Broncos for 7 years, he's been with Mike McCoy twice. I think he makes a perfect candidate to add. You could even go with Ed Dixon, who has played with the Panthers. Even though he didn't really have the connection to Steve Wilkes, he will have connection with Cam Turner, who's an offensive assistant, and then some with Ray Brown. And then the other guy, which would, it's not a sexy thing at all. It's Lee Smith, 30 years old. He's 6'6", 270, and he's a blocker. In 7 years, he's caught 46 passes. But the Cardinals need a blocking tight end.
They do. They absolutely do at this point, and they have to add a body at this point. There's really no. Ricky Seals-Jones is the tight end, right?
They have to sign a start. They have to have a starter that comes out of free agency, whether that's a big blocker, but they can't not come out of free agency with the starting tight end.
Right. And so, but it's one of those positions where it almost feels like an afterthought because they have so many positions at needs that garner more attention, like quarterback, cornerback, along the offensive line. And so when you look at it, it kind of is the forgotten need of this team because they haven't done well in the draft at that position. And then Jermaine Gresham, who played well, not worth what his contract is, but who played well, got injured. And so, and I meant to remind you to talk about this because I've been asked it a couple times, and so maybe people that listen to the podcast can kind of understand this. The Cardinals will not cut Jermaine Gresham. It's not happening.
They'll lose money against the cap.
They lose money. Like they have to pay more money to cut him. So they're not cutting Jermaine Gresham. I've been asked that bunch of times, like, well, why don't they just cut Gresham? They're paying him a ton. Well, that'd be great, but they lose, I think, $3 million or something crazy like that. So, yeah, not going to happen. And he'll be on the roster this, for 2018. He may start on the PUP list even.
It's possible, yeah.
It's a real possibility. So when Jess talks about that they have to have a starting tight end on the roster, we're talking about the fact that they have to have a starting tight end on the roster. Like, they legitimately have Ricky Seals-Jones. You can't trust an Achilles tear to come back that fast for Jermaine Gresham. It's just unfair to him and unrealistic.
Right. And are there any other positions or any other potential players where you see the Cardinals making a move? Defensive line at all? Safety? Anything on the defensive side of the ball?
Not really on the defense side of the ball. I won't be surprised if they bring in a fullback, a veteran, cheap fullback. Maybe even like bring Anthony Sherman back. I think he's a free agent this year.
I think so.
And so, something like that. But that, again, it's kind of like tight ends. It's not anything fun to talk about because we're not talking about a guy that's going to make a huge difference in the statistical part of the game, but they're going to be core starters on this team, and that's what they need right now, are guys that can just start for them. Defensively, I don't know. Like, again, they don't really have any money, and they've invested so heavily in the linebacker. I mean, they've invested so heavily up the middle on the defense, whether it's the defensive line, the linebackers, or the safeties. Like, can they afford to bring in anybody else at this point?
It'd be really hard. Well, again, and it would take them cutting Tyrann Mathieu.
Exactly.
It would take that. That's the only really way that happens. And so I keep saying it's 50-50. They're going to have Tyrann Mathieu. And I still think it's 50-50. But the more I think about it, it's like, well, it doesn't. Again, the defensive back. So do you need your super veteran guy, which you have in Antoine Bethea? You've got your young stud in Budda Baker. Are the Cardinals even going to use 3 safeties on the field this year? That's the thing that's going to be different. Will they be a 3 safety team this year? Because they've always been a 3 and a 4 safety team on the field. And that's what will they end up having 3 true corners on the field this next year? And so really they don't need more. So if you got Bethea and Mathieu and Budda Baker, are you going to end up in a situation where only 2 of them would play consistently? And after that, well, then you can simply kind of roll with the old younger guys, the guys that you could develop, a Harlan Miller, a Rudy Ford, or someone else they bring in this year.
Yeah, exactly. So I just don't think you can invest any more at that position. Like you said, even if you cut Mathieu, you still have Bethea and Budda Baker. You can't bring in a third starter at this point. So,
and with that'll wrap up this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. That wraps the free agency preview. The next time we're on the air, unless something big happens at the beginning of free agency, like if they land Kirk Cousins, we might have a Kirk Cousins show. Other than that, we're gonna wait until the first week of free agency wraps up, because since technically free agency will not actually begin until the 14th, which is, in a week. And as we know with the Cardinals, it doesn't usually happen right away. There's the talk and then expect us in a couple of weeks to kind of talk about what the first free agent moves have been for Arizona and around division. And with that, make sure that you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts. You can find it there, Stitcher Radio, tune in with Spotify. We're pretty much everywhere. You can find us at the Rise Up See Red podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rise Up See Red. You can find us on Twitter as well. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is Rise Up See Red podcast. We'll be talking to you about free agency the next time around. Go Cardinals. Cardinals say rise up, red sea. We change that a little bit and say rise up and see red.
Hey, sports fans, football season's here, and it's time to get in on the action with MyBookie. MyBookie is the industry-leading sports betting website that offers real Vegas odds on football, baseball, and all your favorite sporting events. You can take a side, the total, or even fantasy points props. MyBookie lets you bet online and win big. Did the game already kick off? Don't sweat it. MyBookie has in-game live betting on every major league and event, even esports. There's no better time to join MyBookie than today. Go to MyBookie to open an account and start winning. Use promo code CHAMPION when you register for your account and get a 100% sign-up bonus up to $1,000 on your first deposit. Bet today. Visit MyBookie's website or call 844-866-2387. That's 844-866-2387. Check them out today and use promo code CHAMPION for a 100% bonus. Terms and conditions apply for entertainment purposes only. Void where prohibited.